All right, welcome back to We Know Scripted TV. My name is Grace, and today we are chatting about Netflix's Will and Harper. As I said, my name is Grace, but of course, I'm not alone. I'm here with Chappell. Chappell, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Grace. Thank you for having me. This is gonna be fun.
Well, thank you for having me because we're dropping this in the Nothing But Netflix feed. So if people are a little bit confused about the fact that there's like an episode in the feed that's not mostly just you and Rob or you and somebody or Rob and someone talking about something on Netflix, you're here. So thank you for having me as well. And as I
Yeah,
said to Evvie, we should probably road trip across the United States. If you want to come with Evvie and I, we're already going to do it. You
absolutely.
come with us.
Absolutely. I owe Evie a text.
Okay.
And I'm a really bad texter, but if you get me in a car, I'm great on a road trip. But yes, this is bonus content for Nothing But Netflix, but this is also
Yeah,
be in the We
appreciate
Know
it.
Scripted TV feed as
That's right.
well. Because this is a Netflix is it a documentary? Is it
It's
a
a
movie? What
documentary.
what exactly
It's a
is this?
documentary.
Yeah.
It's a documentary. Yeah, and I do set this up with Evie a little bit. We give a little bit of like why you should watch it, but we'll do
Mhm.
this again here, which is it's Will Ferrell with his friend Harper Steele, former head writer of SNL, and they go on a road trip together about a year to 2 years into Harper transitioning. And so they're friends, and this is a thing. Road tripping is a thing that Harper used to do that she's not sure it's safe for her to do anymore. And Will Ferrell decides to go, and it's also gives them the ability to be in a car all day long and
Yeah.
to like for Will to get to know, not get to know Harper, but like ask some things and figure out their relationship and friendship and all of that sort of stuff. And it's incredible. I think it's amazing. I think it's important that people watch it. And excited to chat a little bit with you, Chappelle, about it. And then Evie and I recorded kind of a full longer recap. We couldn't help ourselves. We went almost an hour talking about the documentary. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely tell why you can go like so long talking about this because there were so many layers, right? Like you got the tried and true format of comedians in cars, riding around.
Yes.
Like we've seen that before a million times. And it's Will Ferrell. He can carry, pretty much anything if he wants to.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was so much more insightful and like more personal. And watching like two people who are genuinely friends for years, for decades, really having to come to terms with, just like this momentous occasion, like this big change in one person's life, but also this and how that affects her reactions now to everything else around her, including her good friend Will Ferrell. And so I was like very happy with watching it because I felt like I was learning, but also was
Mm.
experiencing some of these things with Will Ferrell at
Yeah.
the same time. And I was just kind of trying to put myself in those positions and see the world through, I guess, another set of eyes.
Yeah, I think that's what I really love about it is that it does many things in the course of like the doc in like the almost 2 hour runtime of the movie, which is I do. And it's not that like it's not important for us to continue to see these stories of like trans people and their experience about being trans and to continue to like validate that experience and to hear Harper talk about why she transitioned, why she ultimately like it was the choice that she was the best thing for her to do, and all the things she struggled with before, during, and after. I think it's really good. I also do think this documentary is very interesting from the perspective of like the other thing it's trying to talk about is the friends of people when you have a trans friend, when you have a friend who transitions and that experience. And that's a thing that like I don't really know that I've seen captured in much media. And I say this not to be like we need to be like sympathetic to those people. I think like it's great that like I joke with Evie, you'll hear is like wow, the bar is really low for us to be so impressed by Will Ferrell, which is that he treats his trans friend very nice and kindly and almost like the same as he would otherwise. But I still think it is true that it's like there's been this thing of like I think in a lot of trans media about trans people, and that obviously is important and should come first. But this is actually a story about what happened, what things a friend thinks about when their friend transitions and getting to watch that relationship grow. So I'm so glad you felt because this is my thing of like why I want to chat with you as well as with Evie is that I
Mhm.
think your interpretation, your view, what you took away from the documentary is as important when we're looking at Will and Harper as a documentary as obviously it is from my perspective and for Evie's perspective.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with openly trans people around me, so it's like I didn't know
Neither did I,
anything.
Chappelle.
Right, and so I'm like, I don't have like any source of reference for a lot of the things I've been learning recently in the last few
Yeah.
years, with trans rights and just trans people in general. And so to like kind of watch Will Ferrell go through those same like thought processes, with somebody who's his different, I didn't even think like some of the questions he was asking, I had never even thought to ask.
Right.
I hadn't even
Right.
put myself in that position because I was always like, oh, okay, I'm learning and I'm adapting to what I'm learning, but I'm not actually like close enough to anybody who's trans to have ever sat in a car with them and rolled across the United States and been 30 years of friendship with them, and been so close to where you can ask very like personal, deeply personal questions that you probably wouldn't ask anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I think just before we started, we were talking and you were like, it's interesting because there were questions that got asked. And it's like, should I be asking these questions? And I think
Yeah.
that one thing I just want to flag about the documentary is Harper and Will are letting us watch conversations between the two of them as very like old friends. And
Mhm.
so I think that the thing I would say about like there is a level actually in which like, and I think it's probably some of the like shock that you might have had watching it, is that some of the questions that Will asks are things that I would presume you have seen before, Chappell, of like, do not ask trans people about this question. And like one example is when Will asks Harper about whether or not she's going to get any more gender affirming surgery. And that is a question that I would generally say to most people, don't ask trans people, but it's most important to not ask strangers that question of like someone
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just
in
met at a
general,
party.
yeah.
Like you're just at a party and you're like, you find out someone's trans, like do not go to that area immediately. And then like, if you're but my caveat here is like, ask your friends what you can and can't, like what the lines are in the boundary. So I would assume that if you're going to ask a lot of the questions that get asked, they should be because you're already friends with them. And so like I said to you before, about like, you and I are friends. You have an open invitation to ask me whatever questions you would like about me being trans. As opposed to like, I don't want people to walk away from this documentary being like, I didn't know I could ask about whether or not they're gonna have
Yeah, no,
surgery.
no,
And it's like, no, 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 no,
no.
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
But my key is like in this relationship, like Harper really opens opens the door for Will to be like, you can have to do whatever you want. And I feel like I'm the same. Not everybody is the same. So the next person, another trans person might be like, yeah, please don't ask me questions about like, or more likely they're going to say, you can ask me about these type of things, without, and those, that's the framework in which you can like, those are the questions, you can
Yeah.
ask.
I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to tell me not to ask a stranger about their genitals. Like it's not even like, like it
I
doesn't matter
Chappell,
who
I
they
know.
are,
I'm
but
actually not
no,
speaking to
no,
you. I'm speaking to the
no,
general you.
yes. But my point is that
Yeah.
I'm not talking about anybody's body parts like that in the first place. And so,
That's right.
questions that I would have never even considered to think about. And then
Yeah.
watching Will Ferrell, I obviously have the permission to ask those kind of questions, but generally ask those questions from a place of just wanting to understand. It started to open my mind up to like, oh, I hadn't even been thinking along these lines. I had just kind of been thinking like, okay, whatever you tell me, I'm going to go with it because that's your
Right.
business, and
Right.
I'll try to just like adapt to it. But I guess I never really have been close enough to work to somebody where I could really seek understanding on a granular level. Like I'm sure I could read about it, but I think it's different when you have two people who've known each other for so long to where that everything they're telling you is from a safe place. Will Ferrell's asking questions, and Harper knows that like she's not going to get any backlash from Will Ferrell,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, okay, that's fun to watch this dynamic happen because they're exploring this and like what friends can talk about, like you said,
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
strangers, not acquaintances, but people who really care about each other in a deep way can
Yeah.
ask these questions, learn about it, and then they're like more open to having conversations with other people about like trans rights and like talking about their experiences based on who they know and what they've learned. So it was very fun for me to watch. But yeah, you don't have to worry about me asking about anybody's
You're good. You're good.
stuff.
Well, I think one of the other things too is there's ways in which like people what like there's ways in which like when you have a friend who comes out, and I've had this with with some of my friends, where it's like there are things that we never like had a conversation about, but being friends for 15, 20 years, you have a
Just
sense of
happens.
who that person is. And so
Yeah.
that like when you're at a party or you're at a sports game, like how they want to approach, like what they are going to like and what they're not going to like. And there's a
Mhm.
level, even one of the first things that gets mentioned, and it's played out. There's a joke to it, which I think is like the beautiful thing of this movie is that like I'm a person who moves through the world wanting things to be mostly fun and funny. And so I've
Mhm.
heavily relate to this, but there's a line of like, oh, does Harper like shitty beer still. And then Harper's response in the documentary thing is like, why would he assume that that beer is shitty? You know, like that's the jokey
Mhm.
response. But there is a level of which like you sort of learn when you're a friend with someone over 15, 20 years of like I know what beers you like. I know like what type of food you
Mhm.
like. I know like whatever. And then I think like what Will is trying to do is sort of like figure out how to get to know his friends in terms of the things that are in like instinctually about Harper, and things that might have been things that Harper put on, or like this thing that he says at the beginning, he played a role, like, or sorry, she played a role for years, that she doesn't need anymore. And so that to me is like, I think the most interesting part of the documentary, and why it is like it is a unique situation in terms of trying to figure out like what were the things that you were doing. Like when you moved to Arizona, that turns out to be because you wanted to like live alone and be a hermit so you could like be you without
Mhm.
anybody knowing you were you, right? And so like it's such an interesting examination of Will trying to navigate like getting to know his, like he knows his friend, and you can tell that that's
Mhm.
genuine because of the way they joke, but also like but which are the part, like what are the truest, what's the truest version of you now, you know? It's just I think it's so good, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I think the question Will asked was, "Am I making a completely new friend?"
Right,
And I think that that is probably the question that stuck with me the most is that like
right,
I've been operating as if you were this person, my
right,
entire life, and now you're telling me like, no, I've been performing to an extent. There's parts of me that like I have not been completely like, like forthcoming about because to protect myself, right? And to figure these things out. And so now that I'm out about this thing, this is me. This is me now. And I'm like,
right.
Will Ferrell and me at the same time are at home thinking like, okay, so like what changed? Like what about our 30-year friendship is different? Is there something that I've always been doing that you've been uncomfortable with? Like that's my
Yeah, yeah,
thing. Because
yeah, yeah,
I'm a very laughy, jokey person as well. I love to smile and have a good time. And so a lot of times I'm making jokes and moving around and I would say sometimes it could be kind of reckless, to just be
right.
so jokey all the time because sometimes
Oh,
some of that
I've
stuff
been in a
hurts.
Chappell. Yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
I bet,
uh-huh,
and
yeah,
so I feel like, watching Will Ferrell have that moment, I was thinking the same thing, and I started to, play back instances in my mind, like, oh my God, have I ever, been in a situation where is there something I should be apologizing for years ago for somebody I didn't even know? And then there's that cool part with the therapist that shows up at the
yeah,
Grand
I love,
Canyon or whatever, and
yeah,
she's doing the same thing I was doing. She's like,
yeah,
back then I just didn't have the vocabulary or I didn't have the mind to talk about that thing, even as a licensed professional. And she's looking back and saying, oh my God, this person who I was supposed to be helping, I don't know how I let them. I'm sure I was a blockade in their journey. And it's not because I was hateful. I just didn't understand. And so I was like, all of that was just like mind effing me throughout the entire documentary. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I was like, wow, I'm sitting here the whole time thinking, man, this is crazy. I don't know so it made me very aware, I guess,
Mhm.
of maybe some things that I hadn't thought about.
That's great. That's why I think people should watch this documentary, because I think it's incredible. I talk about one small critique I have at the beginning in my conversation with Evvie that people will hear, but otherwise I think it's nearly perfect. I think it's really good. It feels really real and true. I think it is helpful, I think, for people to see. I think it's, we kind of joke that like it does kind of suck that like we have to like almost like laud Will Ferrell for just, yeah, being
For
an
being,
amazing, not
yeah,
even
just
being
person.
amazing, like
Yeah.
he's just being a friend, and that's like
Yeah.
it's so silly, but like yeah, it's true, and we do still need it, so that's amazing. So I'm glad you watched it. I'm glad people other people are gonna watch it, and that therapy moment sticks with me because that's actually one that as like a trans, I actually don't really know what to tell people in terms of like what should that therapist, how should they actually like, other than like try not to like don't do what you did before, I think is like the only,
Right.
I don't want people to think, because I think that there's a lot of valid, maybe not valid, but I can understand why the therapist probably didn't give that person the support they needed, which is that like part of, this is a thing I talk about a lot with like my mom when I came out, that a lot of what my mom's immediate stuff was like the stuff that I had already like knew was possible, but decided it's worth it to transition anyway, which is like, what if I lose my job? What
Mhm.
if I get kicked out of my house? What if I lose friends? Like all of those things, I had come to a point where it was like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna do it, or I'm not really gonna be able to live happily. But my mom
Mhm.
was only just like thinking about, and so like she expressed a lot of those things. My mom is amazing. My mom is the best. My mom has come such, she's done so much for me. She's so supportive, but I don't really know what to tell people in terms of like what to do with that thing in that moment when like the therapist is like, oh, I think I really messed up back then. Other than like, I don't know, just keep trying to be better. I think, I don't know, just keep trying, keep listening to people. I don't know, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grace, you and I, we on podcast, we are very jokey. And I remember one
Oh
joke
yeah.
that you said to
Oh.
me one time ago, and it
Uh-oh.
stuck with me. And
Okay.
I think I think it was like it was a lot of us on the podcast. It wasn't just you
Yes.
and I. I don't think you and I have just only podcast together at any point. I don't think we've just done
I
a
don't think we've ever
one-on-one.
done just us. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
so. Yeah.
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 This is the first time. So look at that in a
Okay, look
car
at that.
across the United States.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, but you had said something. I think somebody said something about coming out, and you said I come out
Oh
all
yeah.
the time, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah,
sitting
yeah,
there,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think people laughed, and in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
head I was like, oh, like it was like the joke was too big for me because I was like, oh my god, you do, when you introduce yourself and when you
Yeah.
are,
Well, think about Harper
you
in this
know,
documentary. She's when she
yeah,
gets called sir at the diner, the morning diner,
yeah,
and she's like, "No, actually, no, sir, it's ma'am." That is coming out. That's a moment where
yeah,
you're coming out to that. It's like your interaction with the waitress, but like, yeah, it's like coming at
mhm,
you have to come out. Like, there's several moments every time at the bar when they're in the bar, and it's like, this is my friend. Whenever Will's like, this is my friend Harper, like it's essentially a coming out moment. And so I do think people who are queer and trans come out all the time, like all the time, all the time. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It stuck with me, and then hearing them talk about it in here, where I think Harper is saying, does Will see me as Harper, or does he see
yeah, yeah,
me
yeah.
as my dead name in a dress?
Right.
Like is that what you're looking at right now? And I'm like, I don't, I never, my mind never goes there. So I was thinking, like, dang, that's probably, for Will Ferrell, he's like, I've known you as this for forever. And now you're telling me, like, oh, I've been, I haven't seen you. You have
Right.
not been presenting your whole self to me for a number of reasons. But like, now, do you absorb that? Is Will Ferrell actually absorbing what that means? Or is Will Ferrell just being like, okay, it's just a thing my friend is doing, and it's like not really sitting in the truth that Harper's living in. And I was just like, I don't know if I'm smart enough to like
That's
ingest
okay.
all of this at the same time. Like I feel like now I need more content. Like that's kind of
Yeah,
how
yeah,
I feel
yeah.
because I love people. And so watching people interact, that's kind of my thing. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm more of this. I don't know if they can do more of this because it's so specific, but it totally worked for me.
If you need some more specifically Harper and Will comment, I say this to Evvie, their media press campaign about this documentary has been very funny. So just go watch them with like Seth Meyers. They do Bowen Yang and I can't remember the other guy's name. They do their podcast. They've done a ton of media, and it's just you just get them exactly as they. It's very very good. So I recommend that if you're looking for more. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I really struggle with the thing of when people are like, "Oh, I'm grieving the person that I lost," and it's like I understand that because I do think like I'm not exactly who I was before, but so much of me I've always been who I am, and actually I just get to be like a more truer version of myself now.
Yeah.
Um, and like, yeah, like I talk about this. I've like, I struggled when I came out. The exact same things Harper's talking about like, am I allowed to like baseball still? It's like, I think I like baseball for actual real, not for fake pretending to be masculine reasons. So yeah, I love that that's like, what you took from it. And I think I don't think there's an answer. And the like, thing the documentary shows is like, I don't know, just try to be there for your friend. And Will messes
Yeah.
up a lot. This is what Evvie talks about. Will messes up all the time in this documentary and is very vulnerable. And that's important, I think, because I think like when you're talking about like, I don't know, it's like that's okay because just like do the best you can, apologize when you mess up. But most of the time, I know between you and I, like I can tell who's being genuine and trying their best, and even when they mess up, that's okay because I know you're being a friend. So I appreciate you coming on and chatting with me before we chat with Evvie, and for watching the documentary and for putting us in the
Yeah.
Nothing But Netflix feed.
No problem. And I'm so jealous that I don't get to talk to the doctor.
I
I
know,
love
I know.
Evie. But y'all are both amazing, and I'm sure I'm gonna really enjoy listening to it because again, like I said, it made me crave more information because I was learning Harper's experience, but Harper's
Yeah,
experience is not going to be every trans person's experience, especially with her transitioning so late in life. And
yeah.
so I was like, I would love to hear y'all's perspective on what you saw, but then whatever personal stories y'all are willing to share as well. It's gonna be a great time, I'm sure.
Yeah, so we're gonna do that. So we'll pass over to the interview. Not the interview. It's just a combo that Evvie and I have recapping Will and Harper. Thanks, Chappell.
Thanks, Grace.
Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Will and Harper, the Netflix documentary. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. Someone I would gladly take a road trip with across the United States of America. It's Evvie. Evvie, how you doing?
What's up, everyone? It's great to see you, Grace. I love being on this podcast with you. Yeah, it's a thrill because normally you and I only exist together in June,
In
and then we
June.
both disappear when the Pride Has Spoken is over. But it's somehow it's October and we exist again.
Yeah, because Netflix released a trans documentary.
Exactly. We just pop from the holes that
Oh,
we're in
thank
the
God.
meantime.
Thank God Netflix allowed us the opportunity to see each other.
Yeah. Phew.
One time we saw each other in April. We saw each
That
other in
is
Chicago.
true. Yeah, we
Mm.
did at the Chicago RHAP live show, which was so fun. That was so
Can I
fun.
tell you just a quick story about that? The first
Yeah.
time I saw you in person in real life is I did my best.
This was crazy. This never happens. Okay, wait, go ahead. Sorry.
I was doing my best. Don't worry about having FOMO. Go to bed moment. And so I got back to the hotel, and then you had arrived and you were leaving and you were going to go hang out with everybody. And I was like, wow, I should probably just actually take another Uber and go back. Yeah.
I think you're forgetting the part of the story that the Uber that I was waiting for
Was
was
my
literally
Uber.
the Uber that took you home, which I
That's
feel
true.
like you always imagine that might
Yeah.
happen, but it never
Mhm.
does.
Yeah.
You know?
I
But
get
we
it would happen more likely when a bunch of podcasters and reality stars stay in the same hotel. Like maybe
Yeah.
that's more likely, and that's just the instance we give. And cars, what a perfect segue. They also drive a car across America in this
They are
documentary.
trans people and they are talking about cars. So there we go.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to talk about this documentary with you. I got the opportunity to watch this at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I got to see Will and Harper in real life. I got to
Oh,
see them.
really? They were there?
Yeah,
That's
they
so
were there, and
cool.
Harper was like so happy because she got a standing ovation.
Of
And they
course.
both did, but really everyone knew it was like actually for Harper and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chantel, who I went to go see this movie with. And yeah, and then it came out on Netflix. You had messaged me. You were like, I'm about to watch this documentary, and I was like, I know it's actually the best. It's the best documentary ever. Which we'll talk about. But that's how it got on our radar. I think up top we should give people a little bit of a primer of like what Will and Harper is and why I think it's very important that people watch this documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, okay, so for people who haven't watched it, Will and Harper is about Will Ferrell, very famous comedian, anchorman, SNL, etc. And his really good longtime friend, who now goes by Harper, who was she was a writer at SNL and went on to be the head writer at SNL and wrote a bunch of the movies that Will Ferrell became famous for, and they just became longtime friends. And in her 60s, during COVID, sent an email to friends and family, but including Will, saying that she is transitioning to live as a woman, and that she is going by Harper. And this was completely unknown to Will. And the documentary is essentially the two of them go on a road trip across America where they like reconnect as friends in this new version of their friendship, with Harper living as herself. And also, a big element is that Harper is from Iowa and really likes like grungy dive bars and like places and like monster truck shows and sports games, like places that you stereotypically would not think of a place that is like necessarily safe for a trans woman. And so it's kind of like the two of them going to all these places that Harper used to love but has been afraid to go to as herself, and the journey of her experiencing that and them experiencing that together. And Will really learning how to be friends with his friend in a new way. And it's just it's really cool. It's really cool that this exists. I mean, this is the coldest take, but I've seen a lot of people being like, gee, imagine if like people like J.K. Rowling, like this is what they were doing. Like, it's just like Will Ferrell is so famous, so mainstream famous to just like the most regular people, like even borderline, like, it's like he probably could have been Dave Chappelle, you know what I mean? But he's like, and I just feel like this is so absolutely fucking amazing that this is what he's using his platform with. And it's also just like his actual experience of his actual friends. And this is the thing, when queer people, when trans people, it just changes your perspective.
I mean, for me, it's that. And I mean, I think that there's a way in which like, and I agree with you that this is so cool. and also it astounds me that this is like the bar for it's like, wow, a person is really nice to their friend, and we're like, wow, what an incredible human. And like again, there's context to that narrative, but like I do think this is a step to, this is a very public way of showing support for trans people in this way that Will and then Harper, who I think the biggest thing for me is like getting to learn about Harper Steele and how amazing Harper is. Like I think Harper is so funny. I don't know if you've been watching that they've been doing a ton of media for this. It's been popping up all over like my TikTok and everything. And they're so funny together. There's like a way in which there's a moment where I think it's on Seth Meyers where they're talking about a sketch that they always pitched and it didn't work, where and just before Harper's about to say the sketch idea, Will interrupts and is like, you should talk about this. And Harper goes, yeah, no, I was just about to say that thing. And then the joke is like mansplaining. Can you believe it? Like, and there's a way in which like Will then immediately takes on that role. Like there's times in the documentary where like you can tell that they are real friends and their dynamic has changed, but the fundamental nature of their has changed. Where like Will makes all these bad jokes at Harper's expense, like, and that like have like there's just a way that it is really humanizing. I think it's a really humanizing experience of like transitioning, but also like friendship and what that means for the people who transition. And I just love it. And I think everybody, it's very important. I think that people watch this. There's so many things that when I was watching it, this is the most I've ever cried during a movie, just so you know. And watching it at TIFF. And I think it's because Harper's trans experience is not universal, but there's many ways in which like I related a lot to Harper's transition. And so like I'm just being like, wow, that feels like it was plucked out of that's my experience. And then getting to watch it on screen and then having Will Ferrell, a very famous comedian, like validating those experiences was like very cool. And I think that also it's a very interesting documentary in terms of some of the places they go. There's a line that they've been using in trailers a lot, which is like Harper says she loves America, but she isn't sure America loves her back. And I'm fascinated by that idea and what the documentary gets into.
Yeah. So much there in what you just said, Grace. And I think I do think like a theme throughout the documentary is this kind of like, this like really personal thing, right? Like we're seeing these two friends, but then obviously putting that in the context of everything happening in the world and obviously in America with trans rights and trans acceptance. And like, there's this one moment that I don't know. Are we at the point where I shouldn't say specific moments because people should go watch it? Yeah.
Right before I say that people should go pause this podcast. First of all, pause the podcast and then hit subscribe in the We Know Scripted TV feed. So you're subscribed to the podcast. It's very important. And then watch the documentary and then come back and listen to us. And we're going to talk about everything that happened. Not everything. We're going to talk about things that are interesting to us in terms of what was on screen. And I actually, just to spoil, I have small critiques So it's not a thing. I love it. I gave it 5 stars. It's one of my favorite movies of the year. I have little critiques of Will and Harper. So pause, watch it, come back. There we go. Let's get into it, Evvie. Where do you want to start? For me, I always like, what's your headline from this documentary?
Oh man. Well, okay. I think, and I don't know if this, I'm so curious about what falls into critique for you. And what it, for me, the thing that I think was so cool about it, like the big headline is that Will Ferrell comes off like a regular guy who doesn't have like so much information, but is trying really hard and makes mistakes and like does things right and does things wrong and is like trying, but also sometimes puts his comfort or other cis people's comfort above Harper's and then notices it sometimes and corrects it a lot of the time, but not every single time. It's just like in the way where I'm just like, that is so real. And I think that is actually a really accessible depiction of friendship, like of a cis person who doesn't know that much and their trans friend, like in a way that like it felt really true to my experience with so many people where you can be like, wow, I love that person. Occasionally they make mistakes and it sometimes hurts and it sometimes actually makes a situation bad for me, but I know that they love me and like we'll talk about it later. You know what I mean? And I think to me, like I really felt really grateful to him to be like, it's so vulnerable for a famous person to put themselves in a position where, first of all, he's going to get critiqued. So obviously from like right-wing people that hate trans people, like, of course, that's going to be a huge thing. But then he also makes mistakes and like does some like, politically incorrect things to Harper, or like in situations where I'm like, that's so vulnerable. He's like putting, but I think that is so accessible. And I'm like, I want my parents to watch this. I want everyone to send this to their uncles. You know what I mean? Because like, it's very relatable of like, he's trying, but he doesn't know. And all the time, and I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. My critique is not in how Will Ferrell acts or behaves at all in this documentary. That's not it, because I think that when he makes a mistake, and specifically the moments where like Harper corrects him, I think are actually like super important. And the way in which Harper will like oftentimes actually very articulately express the way that trans people feel in moments when things happen, but we don't actually articulate, because there's a big piece of, I think, being trans and also having any sort of queer identity that I often feel like, I don't know. And again, I feel like some of the things I'm going to get into, I want to save the critiques for like way at the end, because I really do want to like acknowledge that I think this is like almost such a perfect film, which is that I feel like sometimes as a queer person that, and specifically as a trans person, that I don't want to create the I put the like onus of like something doesn't feel great. I like want to just like take all it and put it all on me. And there's a really great way in which in these scenes, in these moments, there's like specifically a moment at the diner. And I actually think there's a moment here that I think Will actually doesn't say the thing I think I would want people to say. So the moment at the diner is the person says sir, calls Harper sir. And Harper's like, no, not sir, not sir. And I don't do that a lot. I do not say, no, not sir. I don't do that. I almost always am like, I just don't address it. And sometimes I wish I was more like Harper in the moment. Yeah, like if you get ma'am, right? It's the same, like similar. Like I just like let it happen. I own it, because what I think my internalized thing is like, first of all, sometimes it's my own safety. Like sometimes it happens in like an Uber, and then I'm like, well, I'm not gonna like, I'm not gonna jeopardize like a safe ride to like correct the person's misgendering at me. That's fine. Even like when they're like, for Grace, and I'm like, yeah, and they're like, oh, how are you doing, sir? And I'm like, come on, we're so close. But whatever. Maybe they're not assuming gender with a name, which is also good, and I have to recognize that as well. But Harper validates this by being like, you know what? I really hate being misgendered. I really, really hate it. And I think like kind of wrongly, Will says, it's gonna happen. And I'm like, oh, you don't. I think in that moment you don't. I guess part of me is like, for me, I feel like if someone said that to me, I'm like, that's probably true. And also like what Will does, and what Will does excellently throughout the whole thing, is constantly correct people who get Harper's pronouns wrong, or misgender Harper. But I think in this moment, what was the most valuable to me is I think probably because it's a documentary, Harper, or this is just who Harper is, which I would admire extremely, but I also wouldn't discount that this is not how Harper is in every single interaction she has. But because she has, and she talked about this at TIFF and in many of the media interviews, is that this scenario is actually not 100% authentically like how everything would go if you're a trans person, because Will Ferrell is there and there are cameras and people want to look good in front of the cameras, and they want to have Will Ferrell be their friend. So they actually like will behave probably better than they would normally. But alas, for a documentary, it's amazing. But Harper expressing like, I really hate being misgendered, and having and it coming immediately after a moment of being called sir, like, is a really powerful thing to show, because I think a lot of us like we just take it, we just eat it, and we're like, let's let the moment pass so that it's not more awkward.
Yeah. And it really, that moment really stood out to me as well. And I think what was interesting was, okay, Harper says, I really hate being misgendered. Will says that thing, it's going to happen, which like, just to emphasize, it's like, she knows that. She knows it's going to happen. There's 100%. Nothing helpful actually about saying that. Like she knows that already. But then she says, you know what I would really like in that moment for you to be like, the little lady would have like, she actually like offers like, actually, this is what I would like. And I think that is something that is such a, I've learned that as well, that it's actually like people don't know what to do in that situation a lot of the time. And
I
this
agree.
situation in the diner is one of the earlier scenes in the road trip. And like I've had to myself, it's like people can't, as much as we would like everyone to be like super versed in
Yeah. Yeah,
what trans people want in every moment. First of all, trans people are different and want different things in different
that's
moments,
true.
etc. So there is no
That's
one
true.
answer. And I really appreciate, I'm like, yeah, there's people in my life who I've been like, if that happens, this is what I would like you to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right.
it's like, and you're gonna mess up and I'm gonna mess up and like it's okay. But yeah, and as you said, Will does go on to correct people a number of times. And I also wanted to just briefly talk on the thing of like the fame and the element of,
Yeah.
people potentially behaving at their best because Will Ferrell's there. I think a tension in the film is also like it's helpful because people probably aren't going to commit a direct hate crime against her
Right.
on this documentary. However,
Right.
it's also bringing like way more attention to her because she's
Right.
with Will Ferrell, who everyone is looking at. And I'll say like I have a micro experience of this thing
Yes.
where it's like I have so much attention, more attention
Right.
on me than I would have if I am not
Right.
on Survivor. But then like some of it's good and some of it's scary. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I just yeah, I don't know. That just was really interesting. And like that scene when they're in Texas and Will is kind of doing his Sherlock Holmes thing and everybody is looking at them. And at first it's like, oh my God, Will Ferrell's there. And then it just turns into something
Yeah.
terrible. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, that scene's a real now that's October. That scene is an absolute nightmare. But the for me the best example of the way in which like the unexpected spotlight of like the thing of having Will Ferrell with you is that yes, it's sort of like there's a safetiness to it, and then there's also the realization that it's like it's not fully reality, and that's like
Right.
Will Ferrell's life, so you can't escape that when you're with Will Ferrell. For Harper, who like before this had a degree of anonymity that I think even just by doing this documentary has lost, but probably still by the time sort of this, she's not A-list famous. But the basketball game to me
Yep.
is the best example of the way in which I can, and she talks about this the next day of in the car. And I love this dynamic a lot in the documentary of like letting the thing play out. And then the road trip serves as basically like almost like Survivor confessionals of like, all right, now we're going to talk for real about how that felt and how did that go well. And actually it's another example where I think Will's thinking through and debriefing the game. This is where the governor of Indiana is there, and they don't really realize that the governor of Indiana is like this anti-trans politician until later. And then Will is like one thing that Will is doing is this thing of like, I wish I had have like figured out how to know that in that scenario. And I'm sitting there being like, I think actually if you kick up the conversation with being like, and how do you feel about trans rights? Like like knowing whether or not he believes like actually doesn't really help Harper at all. I think like I actually think the way that he went about, which is that he does say is like, and because the guy's like, are you just going to basketball games? Like, no, this is just a sporting event. This is the first sporting event Harper's come to since she's transitioned. Now the governor knows. Now the governor can do it. But like, it's such and this is the exact thing that like now Harper's like, oh man, now we're in this like picture that looks like friendly. So it's like, yes, Will wants to know this information that he didn't know, but then actually like trying to then immediately be like, and what are your stances on politics might actually become a more uncomfortable situation. And so I just thought this whole thing was really fascinating in terms of like how they wind up in this random situation that they both kind of like don't love how it happened, but I actually don't know if Will's like lesson from it is exactly the right his heart. And I think in the whole time, his heart is so in the right place, is what's most important. And again, like a lot of these things are like, it's not how I would approach it, but maybe it's how Harper and Will, and it's how Harper wants those things to be approached.
Right. Well, and I do think it's also, I think so many of these encounters illustrate this thing where like in the one-on-one human dynamics in the world, a lot of times what both people are trying to do is just make the situation like comfortable and smooth over,
Right.
And like the governor of Indiana knew that Harper was a trans woman, and he knows that he's anti-trans and he doesn't say anything. And
Right.
and just like that is so actually human, like that
Yes.
people are just like, oh, let's smooth it over. And then actually later you're like, wait, what the fuck? I really wish that we'd like gotten into it or like actually like
Right.
address that thing. But
Right.
like so much more we do go for like the safety, the chill response a lot of the times. And then that's the stuff that like also like eats away at you later. And that also feels super true to like all these other experiences of like being misgendered and things like that, where sometimes you do just choose the like, oh, I'll just let that go. But then later you're like, ugh.
Well, it's
Like,
funny because I think in this scenario, they have regret about how what happened, and that's mostly because this like missed opportunity of like you get to talk with the governor and Anna, and you can make the idea that this is a trans person who's a real person who you shouldn't pass legislation to like come to life. There's a really amazing thing that Harper says later about this idea when she's like, when people say like you'll never be a woman, and then she's like, yeah, but like something is happening inside of me that tells me who I am, and then actually I'm a healthier, better contributing member of society by getting to do the things that I want to do. Love that. So there is this moment like missed opportunity. But also I think if like they figure out that this guy's anti-trans and then they like something happens, the next day they're just in the car being like, it was weird about that situation. Like the situation would not have been perfect either way. So it's just interesting to me that like that's the regret in that scenario. Not even the most emotional I think the most emotional Will gets is after the Texas dinner, which if we want to chat about,
let's get into it. That was one of the worst.
It's just and it's so interesting because it does come off not terribly long after the Oklahoma bar scene, but in a way, there's a way in which like Will's spectrum. I think this is what he regrets most the next day, is that they do a thing that is much more spectatory and they're actually literally on a platform, right?
Yeah, right. Literally.
And so there is much less opportunity of like in the bar, they can chat with people. And actually like Harper goes in first to have this moment of like trying to see what it would be like to go back to a bar. And then Will Ferrell comes in later. And that's where like it gets like nicer, I think, in that instance, as opposed to this always feels like it never moves past like you are being watched. And I think probably like because it's not like there isn't negativity, because in the segment after where Harper's reading the tweets about she mentions the basketball game, and so there are people, they got tweets after probably everything that they did that was public. This just felt I think because of the Sherlock Holmes thing, because they're on the platform, because they get introduced, he seems like he's there more as like an entertainer to try and like make a point than I think the dirt biking scene, which is lovely, the bar scene, which is lovely. It feels different. I think I can understand why it ended up feeling different. It still just sucks that's that's what happened,
I know. And it also obviously like adds an element perhaps of like Will is wearing a costume. Like, what is the other person at the table up to? You know what I mean? Like, and I there's some elements of like him wearing disguises. Like, I actually had some weird. I was having some like feeling at the end when he like goes to the store for some reason
I hate the how he dresses in the fancy dinner scene.
Well,
I get what he's doing, but there's a level in which he's like pretending to try to be anonymous that is funny, but I didn't like. I'm like, no, just have a really nice dinner with your friend, which I guess he's saying like, because I'm famous I can't. So but I never thought about it with that one, because I'm more thinking about the things that the other people did wrong. But it is an interesting point to think that he's dressing up, and then you're with the trans people who often get accused of dressing up.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
I was literally having this like body reaction. I'm like, I know that Will Ferrell is not about to put on a dress and come to this thing.
Yeah, I knew.
It felt in my body like that might be what happens, because that is such a trope in like comedy, especially in things like that.
Yeah.
That's not what happened. I think it was like I think it was like nice. He was trying to be anonymous so that they could just be friends. Whatever. But there's something in that, and like
so interesting.
Yeah.
But the Sherlock Holmes thing, it's like, he is in a thing that seems that is not them. The dinner that they have later, the point is only to like not have paparazzi, not have people like look at them, as opposed to the eating the steak is much more of a moment of like there is like a spectacle thing to it. And so him dressing up in this moment, and and then like Harper's reading these awful things that are said about her. I did love when Harper says the next morning, she's like, here's one that's just about you. It's like, there's a satanic evil pedophile, and he's like, how do you know that it's about me? And she's like, no, I just know. I think that's so funny. That's so funny, like familial joking around. That's so funny. But yeah, this is just kind of horrific. And I it's so funny because it's almost the most antithetical thing in the from everything else that happens, and I kind of love it's in there because it makes it complex, which is there's so many moments where I think the point that's made about how media and politicians foster hate and lead people, and where the Oklahoma bar scene is antithetical to the things that often we think. Like there's so much. I think Harper, when she's leaving and she's breaking out after the dirt biking race. Also, I want to mention the guy has one of the best lines that I don't think he meant intentionally, but he says he says, "Do you love dirt biking?" And she goes, "I used to love stuff like this." He says, "Well, if you love it, come out." And I don't think he meant. I think he meant
come out.
I think he meant like come and watch it. I don't think he meant come. But I think it's a very great lesson, which is like, if you feel, if you love it, that's who you are. Come out. As opposed to this scene in Texas that is just like, it is. There's nothing good that comes, seemingly the way the documentary points it, comes out of this moment.
I think it like also that scene. Like I know that's just gonna stay with me for a long time because I also feel like it really, okay, so blah, blah. Okay, vulnerable story that
okay, great. I was about to jump in with a vulnerable story, so you
okay, great.
I should give the floor to you.
Great. The first time that I'm sure a lot of people listening to this know that I had top surgery in February,
right? And
in May, I went to Mexico City, and it was the first time I was like anywhere with my new chest. And my partner and I went to these hot springs, and it was so cool. And then it was like, oh wow, this is the first time I'm gonna be in public with my shirt off. And it was like we just chose the wrong thing to be the first time. Like we're in a foreign country, we're at this like really intense like tourist situation where there were like hundreds of people, and like the feeling I had was everybody is looking at me and wondering what the fuck I'm doing and like what is happening. And I was very careful for the sun, so I had like tape on my scars, and I'm like, they're probably just like, who is that fucking freak? Like that is the feeling that I was having the whole.
Harper says that leave it. She's like, that's the internal feeling that she had that she was putting on other people. That like the unfortunate thing is it's like probably mostly not true. And then probably some parts.
Sometimes it is true. Right. And that's the thing. Like in that moment, I just kept, and my partner just kept being like, no one cares. They're not like, maybe they're like, oh, huh. But we don't know that what they're thinking is that fucking freak.
Yeah.
But then to be Harper and to the next day literally go on Twitter and you just see all these people who were saying that, and you actually get to see the deepest, darkest, most fucked up things that they want to put out there in the world. And it's just like, that is such a nightmare. And that feeling of all the eyes on you and wondering, and it's just so intense and just so vulnerable and brave that she was willing to do this, because I really do think this is a really impactful piece of media. And I'm super grateful to her. Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine, because I get the smallest sliver of it in the fact of like, I'm here on RHAP, which is a successful reality TV show network. You have been on Survivor, like people watch you on TV. And so I think like between the two, like you get it less than Harper's getting right now. I'm getting it less than you got when you're on Survivor, but like to the extent it's still that thing of like, people will see. People might have seen it when I'm like on a recap of Big Brother right after the thing. There are transphobic comments that are like coming through the chat, and I remember telling. I just want to shout out Sam Moore one time, because Sam Moore, lovely producer of this podcast, I sent him a message after an episode, and I said, hey, I think that there were some like comments that like they just really got to me, because I was like watching the comments come through, and Sam was like, I'll go back and delete them. And I was like, it's great. And he said something along the lines, no, he didn't say, oh, I could get them. and this would be a correction I would have for Sam in the future, but he said, "Oh, I thought I got all of them," and so Sam said like, and then I was like, "Oh, there was more I didn't see. Thank you for doing that. Like, thank you for basically being in that situation, like the Will to my Harper of like deleting comments, so you hope I don't see them." And in my thing is like, if I didn't know that there were more, I might feel a little better about like humanity. I'm very grateful to Sam for deleting as many as he saw. But yeah, there's a way in which like if he never told me there were more, I wouldn't think that there were. And now I'm like, oh my god, there were more. But at least I didn't see them. So Sam is normally doing his, I'm like, it's a whole complicated, messy thing that I'm like thinking about in that moment. So it's like the other thing too is like I do see a lot of love in the chat. Like when like I was away for this year and then I was away for a few weeks and came back and people are like, Grace is back on the podcast. It's like that is nice too. And people see me for who I am. And so the thing I say about for you and the way I'll relate it back to the documentary is like, yeah, like it takes a lot for you to do the thing. And I have it too. And I'm like, the swimming scene for me, I can't like that to me was like swimming was probably for a long time in my life, my favorite thing. And there was probably a good, I don't know, 6 years I didn't go swimming. And so like seeing Will give space to Harper, and again, he does it in his own way where he wears a Speedo and blah, blah, whatever, but like they get in the pool and it's very nice and et cetera, et cetera. But like seeing people do the things that I want to. So like for me, one of the most important things about transitioning and has made me like take steps I didn't think I could take, similarly to the way that Harper ends up doing this, is seeing other trans people in real life. And so like, yeah, there might have been people who were like thinking, don't know what's going on as they see you, but there's also somebody who might be like, oh my God, that could be me. And then like, they will do that at some point in their life too. Like, I think that's the other important point about like being authentic and being allowed to be authentic is that like, it just spurs other people who need to be their authentic selves. Because otherwise they'll do what Harper talks about many times in the movie, which is, at best hide away in a shack in Arizona and at worst buy a gun, Yeah. So, yeah.
And I actually did really appreciated the Will in the Speedo and his comments about like how he also has body things that he's like uncomfortable with and that are like hard for him sometimes to be like showing this much. And I really like that also in the way of it is like, yeah, trans people have specific problems and also like lots of people have all sorts of body uncomfortabilities and body shame things, and that just like is also just like a human experience. And I think there's also some nice connectivity of like, yeah, like that's okay. Famous Will Ferrell also like is uncomfortable with his body sometimes, and it's not because he's trans, it's because he's a person. And like, I don't know, I like that.
Well, the amount of like gender affirming surgery that cis people have is a lot.
Right.
It's a lot.
Right.
Yes, people get their plastic surgery and all sorts of stuff that people do to affirm their gender.
Yes.
I also love the moment where they meet the activist, and I cannot remember her name. But and there's this moment talking about like the things you do and don't, and she's like, yeah, I did go to try to do voice training and I hated it. And voice training is a thing that I have struggled with a lot because where I'm most predominantly doing a lot of things is talking on a podcast. Like I hate hearing myself, but I also sometimes feel the thing of like, I don't really want to do voice training. And so the line that this person says is like, a lot of transitioning is learning to accept yourself. It was so powerful to me because I think it's true that there are like the things that you're like, oh, that has never been right. That's never felt right. The more the Harper thing of like, the more I do things, the more like myself I feel. And then also getting this piece in here that's like, yeah, but sometimes things are just you. And actually, I do think for me, that was a big thing. Actually, my friend Christina, who actually was like the first person I ever came out to, messaged me after she was watching this documentary and was like, I kind of feel like maybe we were Will and Harper. I was like, I kind of agree with that. There was a lot of, for me, like figuring out like literally like the silliest, it sounds silly at the time, but it's like, can I like baseball? I think I like and like trying to figure out, did I like baseball because it like helped me like blend in, hide, like find a thing that I like, did I really like it or did I kind of like fake like it because like, whatever. I love baseball so much. But I feel like you can see Harper like reckoning with that stuff. And I think that this person, like, again, I feel really bad, I can't remember her name, but being like, this is my voice. So this
Yeah.
is what my voice is going to be. I'm only doing voice training for other people, so I'm not going to do it. I love that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think yeah, the accepting things as well. Like yeah, really resonates with me. Like, uh yeah. Almost yeah. A little more personal than I want to share, honestly. But
No,
there's
don't.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
but
good. Yeah.
no, but there's absolutely things where it's like, wow, there are these things that there are solutions for that feel so good and affirming. And then there's things where I'm just like, that is my body and that's how I am. And like it's intense. And it's also like that is also so human, that
Yeah.
everybody has those things. And I think yeah, no, it's so powerful. I love that that conversation with them. Yeah, all
Uh,
these brave people, all these brave people.
Can I give a shout out to some of my favorite moments that were just
Yeah.
genuinely funny in this that
Yeah.
actually have nothing to do with people being trans or not. The kid on the unicycle is an absolute star of this thing. The
Yep.
person who he does not that person does not care.
Yep.
Doesn't know Will Ferrell.
Yep.
Obviously doesn't know Harper. Just unicycling to school maybe, and then
Yep.
it's like, okay, cool. And gets on his
Yeah.
unicycle.
Okay, bye. Yeah.
A plus, phenomenal. I think the other piece I laughed at more than anything is Will Ferrell yelling at the dogs from the
Oh yeah, that was hilarious.
from the hot air balloon. Like absolutely killed me. I was already feeling like it's so late in the documentary, and I had felt like so many times I was crying because I was emotional. And
Yeah.
then Will yelled at the dogs, and I was crying so much because it was funny. It was like a release of all the tension.
I loved the part when they were in the car and he starts the like I want Dunkin' Donuts bit.
Yeah.
And but it was like, we haven't done anything fun. All we do is talk to trans people.
Yeah, there is a way I really appreciate, like both in the documentary and in some of the media they've been doing afterwards, that I feel like one of the most important lessons, and there's the thing very early on, Harper's language to talk about what was going to happen, which is that like Will has always been friends with Harper Steele. He just knew the persona Harper Steele had to play to survive, basically. The idea, like there's a lot of times with like people when you come out about this, like the grieving aspect of it. And I find that I don't love it, but there's this very like complicated thing about like, you did know me, but you also you didn't fully know me. And
Yeah.
so now you get both. Like you get to like probably a lot of the things that the way I acted and behaved before I came out, like your true essence, you can't really hide. And then it's just that you get to be a truer version of that person when you come out. And so that language, and I do just feel like, I think it's one of my favorite things is that Will, it doesn't seem like there is a huge difference in the way that like fundamentally him and Harper like communicate, joke with each other, make fun of each other, the way they joke around. Like there's the moment where it's like he makes the really bad joke about the racks at Nordstrom's after getting a new rack. And then like it segues into them doing a bit about like, you really have to explain the joke,
Right.
that feels like very true to what
like a thing they've probably done 1,000 times. Yeah,
Right,
totally.
right.
Totally.
So I love that aspect of the documentary, that it's like, it does feel like a very typical relationship that I've had. I'm sure you've had that, like, yeah, like I have a bunch of like, male friends that I like grew up with or went to summer camp, like, and like, yeah, it's a different dynamic now, but like, it also is like, it isn't really, but sometimes it is,
100%. I feel like I've had that with people like my friends from college and things like that, where I also feel like that was a time where I feel like, some of the things were really starting to come up. Like, I feel like I'm like, oh wow, these were ways in which I really was like performing a thing.
Right.
And I feel so nervous sometimes of like, that was how I related to these people in like, especially like talking about like straight stuff, like straight hookups and things like that.
Right.
And then being like, oh, but now I have gay hookups and that's more fun because I'm actually really excited to talk about them and that's fine. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's just like, and like, yeah, these things where it's like, yeah, maybe, if there are people that only wanted me for the fake thing, then that's fine because that's fake anyway. So like, they're not my friend. And then but then the real ones, it's like, oh, you're happier now. I love that for you. Like I recently had lunch with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. And she was like, "You're exactly the same. Like, you're
Yeah.
exactly the same, but like in the
Yeah.
best way." You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and I was just
Right.
like, that's right. I've actually, this has all always been here. I'm like, wow, I'm so different now. And it's like, no, I was always this. You know what I mean? In a way, like,
Yeah, I think with people who you feel comfortable being yourself with, it's
right.
still, that's going to be the same, just with these things that are, that we like hit, we like society made us hit it for our own safety too. Like, it's like a big thing. I think
Yeah.
about when like the moments where like Will does something, is like the thing I was getting to earlier is that like I think that like sometimes, and what I was gonna say is this moment of like Harper expressing, please like correct them or make a show of it in the way that I know you joke around. So then be like, what are you gonna get, little lady? You know, like that piece. Um, I would suggest that people, the way I like coming out of this, like if you have a trans friend that you hang out with and whatever, like ask them whether or not you do want people to correct, because like there is a way in which like there are specific moments where I'm like, I would love for you to correct that person. And there are times when I'm like, for my own safety, actually, I do not want you to correct that person. But it's all individual. So it's about what that person wants. I thought the one of the moments I absolutely love is when Will gives Harper earrings. And this
Yeah.
is so cute. I think that there is ways in which like, I think obviously this movie is mostly about a trans femme experience. And so this thing of like dressing up to go for dinner and wearing earrings and that being okay, because like that is a complicated thing I think sometimes trans women have, of like feeling like, because there's this critique sometimes of trans, like we play into stereotypes, and it's like sometimes sometimes they are stereotypes, and sometimes it's like, no, generally what I want to do to feel better about myself. And so the pearl earrings is so cool. I see a lot on Twitter of like, if you've never sent a trans femme person flowers, send them flowers at some point. Wait for a time to send them you send me flowers, Evvie. This is an example.
I did.
You send me flowers, which I very much appreciate and love. And so like this moment is so special to me. But like, think about like, because there's so many times I think as trans people, like there are things I feel like we missed out on, like especially old people who transition like later. Everybody does to a degree, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
And so like I'm sure there's things part of your life experience of like, oh yeah, I've never done that thing that feels like a thing that you would want. And I just love this moment where Will, he just gets it so right. This gift giving moment is so right. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I love that as well. And I feel like you were saying, I feel like there's so many things in their friendship where it feels like, okay, they're doing the thing that they probably always did. But I feel like as it goes on, there start to be things where I'm like, I feel like the way that like Will is kind of like occasionally like puts his hand on like the small of her back, like when they walk into a place, in a way that feels very like how, how Will Ferrell probably treats women, you know what I mean? In a way, in a really nice way, you know what I mean? Where I'm like it feels like there is some like evolution of his perception of her, and like really just that comfort with like, oh, this is my friend who's a woman and I'm going to give her earrings because she might really like those. You know what I mean? Like, I also agree. It was really sweet. And yeah, if Will Ferrell was my friend, I would want him to buy me a lot of stuff because he's really, really rich. Yeah.
Well, it comes up in the moment with Molly Shannon when they're getting their nails done, which is like Molly asks like, what have you both learned from each other? And Will's thing is like, oh, I didn't actually know how bad it was. Which I think is because most of like, there's this moment when you like, and I was talking about this, that like there's this moment when you figure out that you've like accepted that you're trans. You haven't told anybody yet. It's like it has not been safe for you because you've only literally in one moment figured out like oh I think maybe I'm trans, and you would live with that alone. And for some people maybe that's like, you tell someone the next day. I don't know. For me it was probably like months and maybe even like years, maybe even that I lived with it just with me. So it's a very like isolating and lonely experience. And so I think that like probably Will doesn't even get the full extent of like how bad, I think, full extent of how bad it was in those times. But then to get that insight, I think to then just realize like, okay, you need to be you and you are you, and I'm going to treat you as my friend. to his Harper,
Yeah.
you know? It's very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't have much to even say about this, but Harper's answer is Will really loves me. Like that's the thing I
That's
learned.
very cute. I love
You
that.
know, it's
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
really sweet. And
Okay,
just bringing up
yes.
Molly Shannon. Oh, I just want to say, it
Yeah.
was so cool. Like, if you haven't actually watched it, there's a lot of other SNL, really famous SNL people like Seth
Yes.
Meyers, Tina Fey, Will Forte, Kristen Wiig. And it's just very clear that it was like this SNL crew being like, we accept Harper. We want to be in this pro-trans documentary.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it was a really cool statement from all of them at a time when it's just really, really important. So I thought that was very beautiful.
I agree. Harper's sister has it's one of the best moments I've ever seen. I talk a lot about how amazing my brother was when I came out to him, the many times I came out to him. But she being like, oh, I need to respond really quickly. And then what she said was, oh, great. I've always wanted a sister. Like, absolutely broke me. I was like, that's
Yeah.
the best. There is like not a better thing
I
that
started crying then too,
her
for sure.
sister could have told her. It's so good. And if you have someone who comes out to you, like, resist the urge to know how much it took for that person to get to that moment where they're willing to tell you, and really think about what they might need in that moment instead of what you need to say to that person. It's so good. It's so good. What a great response. What a lovely response. It's so cute.
And I do think that the quick, like the thing that she was saying about, I just want to respond quickly, like to affirm and like that. When I sent an email to my parents and my sister and my brother-in-law telling them that I was going to get top surgery, and my sister and brother-in-law texted me right away, we're out at dinner, but we just want you to know we love you. We'll call you later.
Love it.
And
Love
it was just like so perfect. I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I needed that so much, you know.
My brother said when it came out as trans, he said, "Oh, that's great. What do you need from me?" That's what he said. Yeah, that's a very my brother. That's a very my brother answer. If you don't know my brother, it's very my brother of like, we all of our love language is like gifts of service. Is like basically like my mom and my brother and I. We're little Canadians who were like try to sneak off to pay the bill. We go for lunch and like we just want to make everyone's lives easier, I think. And so my brother was like, his first day was like, yeah, what do you need me to like? What do you actually need me to do? Okay. Can I be just for a quick moment, a little critical?
Yeah.
For me, I feel like the first 5 to 10 minutes of the documentary feel like a place we've moved past in terms of the way we tell trans stories, which is the thing of Will Ferrell coming in and being like, I'm going to do the thing where I don't know I'm in a documentary and I'm saying that so funny. But once we get to the like, I had this friend Andrew, and my friend was a guy, and he blah blah blah. This and all the photos of it, and blah blah blah, and then the stunning reveal of like, and it's actually Harper. I just think I get it. I get why it's there. I think it's actually, if you think about this documentary mostly being like, where I would recommend this to people is like, if you're trans, I think you're gonna like, your heart will melt. It's gonna be great. If you're like cis and like don't really know a lot about I think it's going to be incredibly informative. And I feel like it caters mostly to that audience who like want the story told in a way. And I think they kind of like almost like maybe this is the point, is that they kind of like trick you into watching something that is like actually one of the best versions of trans representation I've seen. So they kind of like are like, we'll do the thing, but just to get them to watch. And then once they're in, we'll like blow their minds with actually how transgressive trans media can be. But I'm a little like, aren't we? And unfortunately, I will say there's a movie that's coming out on Netflix. Have you caught wind of Amelia Perez yet?
No.
Evvie, Amelia Perez. I'm just gonna try to give you the byline here. This is a Spanish language French musical crime comedy that is about.
That's my favorite genre.
It's about a Mexican drug cartel boss who transitions.
Whoa, that's very
won
cool.
second place at the People's Choice at TIFF. Unfortunately, I think it falls into the sometimes it's actually pretty transphobic thing. And so I'm a little worried because it's a Netflix movie that it's like basically going to come out. Let me see what day it's coming out. This fall, I think. November 1st. No, November 13th, it looks like. I'm a little worried about that being the follow-up to this, but alas, you'll rejoin me when we talk about
Wow. Okay. Can't wait for
in
that.
the fall in a month. But I just think that the beginning framing of the story, we don't even really. I like it. The thing is that like I think it's interesting that Andrew, sorry, I was apologize that I did that. That Harper is was the head writer of SNL, and there's this really interesting moment with Will Forte where she's like, "Well, if I didn't transition, I wouldn't probably have done these things," and that's like a very valid experience for like Harper to have. It sucks that that's probably true. So bummer. But I don't know. I think that like there's a way in which like I don't know if they needed to do the first like 10 minutes of the documentary like they did the first 10 minutes of the documentary. But
Yeah, I totally hear that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like in some sense, Harper, it's like the story is about Harper, but your entry point is through Will. And I think that is the strength of it because I do think, as you said, I think it is for that audience. And I think that is like what will make it accessible in some ways. But then, therefore, they're telling it as Will experienced it. You know what I mean? In this way that I hear you completely. I think the only thing that it's like, I assume is Harper executive producer or like of the like I'm just like of course she got to decide that was okay, I assume, right? I mean
I do not believe she is a producer on the film. I don't see her listed. That doesn't mean that's not true. I'll just try to fact check that because we're doing it. And I do presume that this is a documentary that had her like she was allowed to make it, choices in terms of how she was portrayed. So I don't mean to do that they did this without Harper.
No, but I know what you're saying. It's just like we don't have to have that. We don't have to have that. Like there's
or maybe we do now, and it's kind of a bummer that that's true, And so, like in 10 years, when there's another great trans documentary or whatever, oh God, I hope it's sooner than 10 years.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Even just like the way that I give the summary, like, is just so doable. Of like, there's this person Harper who was the head writer of SNL, and she transitioned in her 60s, and you kind of, it's like, yes, probably your brain just did some back work that probably like did the story that the way they told it, but you don't need to tell it that way or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And
like,
again, and it's Harper's story. So if actually Harper thinks it's a more effective way to tell the story, and again, I think that I can understand why they thought they needed to do it. I think it's basically a combo, like you saying, being like, yeah, it's from Will's point of view, so you tell it that way, and then Will reading the letter, and then we meet, and then you meet Harper. There's that, and also I think it's the reason. Sometimes the reason that like some of the ways trans stories were told, and I think that there's like almost this like unpacking that's happening, or like untying of the knots that's happening right now, is that like there are ways in which trans people told their stories, or the people whose stories were told in a way to be accessible to cis people that we now have to like figure out how to untie. We have to figure out how to be like, I'm sorry we told you that. It was only so that you would kind of like actually listen to us and make sense of us. And I'm struggling to think of like an example. I think even like sometimes with just some of the stereotypes that that people, you will go like, you go from being male to then female, like some of the language that has changed since then, right? Too. And that like every trans person is going to have like gender affirming surgery. Not true. And it's not that it wasn't really like everything was saying like trans people were all going to have surgery, but there is a way in which like the stories were told in a way that they felt it was like a necessity to tell those stories, or they weren't ready to. And some of the tropes have stuck, and some of them, we've moved on.
Yeah, well, and then there's also the thing where it's like some people's individual experience is like the like, for example, I think like a narrative that I like struggle with is to some degree what Harper's story is, of like she was so miserable she was gonna kill herself, like this narrative that like in order to, for like, I think some people then take that to, in order for it to be valid that you're trans, you must have been suffering so much that like that now it's worth it for you to like do this drastic thing. You know what I mean? And
gender dysphoria is a great example of a thing that we use to explain what being trans is like. But actually, some people don't have gender dysphoria, and some people don't even have it like body dysphoria, and some people don't even have. Some people have it about parts of their body, not other parts of their body. Like, and those are valid trans people too. So it's like, we're like trying to like untie the whole thing that we did just to make sure that like the conversation could move forward,
Totally. Yep. Totally.
So, but as I said, I think it's only like the first 10 minutes that I like have like basically everything else. I'm like, I do think it's kind of like, okay, they did it to then get people to be like, oh, how interesting. And then they watch it, and then they get kind of tricked into watching like a really like heartfelt,
Beautiful.
humanizing, beautiful story about friendship.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah.
It's very good. It's a very good documentary.
Very good. It's very good.
The problem I think is that like any other year I'd be like, this is going to win best documentary. Unfortunately, I think The Daughters on Netflix is if you haven't watched that, it's incredibly powerful and great, and probably will win best documentary. So Will and Harper probably won't. It should get nominated though, for not that that's the litmus test for how whether things are good or not, but
that's definitely important. Yeah, I haven't seen Daughters, but should I watch it?
Yeah, you should watch it. It's great. It's about fathers who are in prison, have been imprisoned, and then having a daddy-daughter dance. It's all you're gonna cry a lot. But they covered it on Nothing But Netflix earlier this year, so check that out. Yeah, this is beautiful and amazing, and people should let us know what they thought of it, and
yeah. Before we close, I was wondering, you said that there were like a lot of things in it that really spoke to your experience. I was just wondering if there was any other things you wanted to share.
I feel like we've talked a lot about them. I feel like the sports thing for me was one where Harper's like, it's funny because she like feels like she used it as a way to like
bond with
men, and then she's like, and actually I do kind of like it, but then going back to it and feeling uncomfortable. The dirt bike racing scene, I not that it's like I have had these moments where it's like people I wouldn't have expected to be supportive are supportive. This moment where the guy just stops her and is like, but are you happy? And she's like, yeah, I'm super happy. And he's like, that's great. And then that's all that's all that's needed is like, bingo, done. It's amazing. The swimming scene for me is extremely touching. And then the last one, a scene that we haven't really talked about, which is that I think is like not for me, but a way in which I think people get worried about how they be perceived, which is this therapist who is like, you know what? I feel like I had a patient many years ago who I failed. And I was like, that's a level of vulnerability to say on a Netflix documentary.
I agree.
She's
I was
signed
like,
a
that
release
person
form.
is so brave. Yeah. Yep.
And good for you. I don't think that we all like, I think that like, I would presume that because of where she is at now, she was not like, being like methodically evil when she just really did. And I think that there is this instinct for cis people sometimes. I think I can't remember where I saw this notion relayed recently, but this idea that like the time when I come out and tell, like when I'm at the point I'm at that I'm telling you that I'm trans, for me, I know you just talked about like, so I will speak to like my experience, because I know you just talked about the deep dark like moments, and then that being the validation point. But like the point where I'm ready to be like, my life will be better if I do this thing. Not that there's not ways you can change it, and there's not things but it's like I'm ready, I'm ready to figure out my path moving forward. And I mean, that's a really important, I think, thing for like, is like listening. This is a thing that I think Will does a lot of this documentary that I think is really important, is like listening and following Harper's lead, in this thing. So I love the moment where she's like, I think I did that poorly. And I feel like that's like, I think that people should like, now it's not that we're going to try to like cancel that person from her job. It's that like admitting that is like a step towards figuring out how to make sure you're doing it right, I think. So I really loved that moment. And there's so much good Americana folk music in this that was, as a summer camp person, these are all songs we would sing around the campfire. Some of the covers, the song, there's a moment, then they leave the dirt bike track, that's Paul Simon's America. It's just something I absolutely adore. And it's just this awesome cover. They play only the instrumental version of Wildflower by Tom Petty, which is a song that I deeply related to in terms of, I went to work at an outdoor education center and I was like hanging, and it's the first time I'd ever come out as queer to like, I was like publicly out. So I think I'd come out to people, but not, then it was like a thing that everybody, like, it was like, it's still a thing of like, okay, but don't tell anybody, And so I was working at this outdoor education center and I'd hang out with this group of people, and this one guy in particular who I'd like play baseball video games with. I came out as gay at the time, not as trans. But it's, for some reason, that was like the song we played all the time that spring, was Wildflower by Tom Petty. And they play the instrumental version in this documentary, and it's incredible. So just all the Americana folk, I was like, I think this movie was made for me.
I love that, Grace. I love
Yeah.
that for you.
Yeah. I love
Awesome.
Americana folk. I'm Canadian, but I love Americana folk. Yeah.
You're one of us.
I'm
One of us.
Well, we'll see in a few months. We'll see about we'll see like in a month.
One of us, Grace.
Amelia Perez is coming out like November 13th. Very interesting
Mhm.
time for that movie to drop on Netflix, I think,
Oh,
depending on
God.
how your country down there is doing. Well, I think that's it. Unless do you have anything else you want to add? Thanks so much for joining me, Evvie. This was so great.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Grace. Literally, I watched the first 5 minutes and I was like, I really hope that Grace, I hope that this document, the rest of it's good. And I hope that Grace likes it. And I hope that we do a podcast about it. So
It was,
here we are.
Seeing Harper get a standing ovation at the film festival was an absolute treat. And she actually did say, she's like, this is way better than Sundance, which I think where they also premiered the film, which is more like Toronto is more of like a people pleaser thing, where Sundance is like kind of like hoity-toity a bit with indie films. And she's like, this is amazing, which was like so sweet to see that
That's
happening.
beautiful. She deserves that so much.
I know. Watch some of the late night. The one with Seth Meyers is particularly very funny.
I'll check it out.
Check it out. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Again, make sure you're subscribed. Let us know what you thought of Will and Harper. And thanks. I believe this is dropping in the Nothing But Netflix feed. So big shout out to Chappell and Rob as well. And I guess until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.